But the roots of that hostility have been around a long time. Francis Schaeffer provided the following analysis back in the 70s, which I thought was kind of brilliant. He said, in ancient Israel, when the nation had turned from God and from his truth and commands given in Scripture, the prophet Jeremiah cried out that there was death in the city. He was speaking not only of the physical death in Jerusalem, but also a wider death. Because Jewish society of that day had turned away from what God had given them in Scripture. There was a death in the total culture and in the society around them. You see, Israel's main purpose as a nation was to be a light to the Gentile world. When Israel's light was darkened by their disobedience, death came through the world through depravity. And out of that mess, the church was born. Now we have been given the privilege to be that light. You know, Christians back then faced depraved Roman Empire back in Peter's day, who craved violence. As a matter of fact, their favorite venue was the Colosseum. The Colosseum, they loved watching gladiators murder each other. They loved watching Christians being thrown to the lions for sport. Believers in Peter's time faced all kinds of hostility and depravity that still assault the church today. But they face more frequent and overt hostility and persecution than believers face in today's culture. See, Satan now, especially in America, is more cunning. In third world countries, you could see him coming. You're face to face with the evil in third world countries. But here in America, Satan is in leadership positions in our government. Satan is in leadership positions in churches. He's more smooth. He wears suits here in America. He's very polished. But in some parts of the world, however, there is direct persecution of believers. Places like Asia, the Middle East, South America, Europe. Believe it or not, even Canada. Canada is arresting pastors. Canada! And it's likely in coming years, if not sooner, Christians everywhere will face increasing hostility, both from civil authorities, from the media, from unbelievers at personal levels, from unbelieving friends and family. It'll get worse, guys. Satan is slowly convincing the world it's the Christian that's the troublemaker. Notice that. It's the Christian who is judgmental. It's the Christian who is ignorant. It's the Christian who's the homophobe. Is the Islamophobe. It's the Christian. If you notice that, look around you. And Satan is putting fear in the believer's hearts. Think about it. I want to think about this for a second. Critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, social justice is more an attack on Christianity than anything else. The target is the white Christian male. I don't care if you disagree with me or not. It is. It's not about good or it's not about the Democrat, Republican. It's always been about good and evil. Always. Many Protestant seminaries have adopted these ungodly ideologies. It's permeating the church. And pastors are so afraid of the culture and so afraid of their job security that they're caving into this and teaching this in our seminaries, Protestant seminaries. Fear has replaced fearless in the Christian community these days, and it is because of the weakness in the pulpit. Weak and pathetic pastors fearing their job security, they fear man more than they fear God. And the new mentality for the big Christian church is let's go along to get along. That's not faith. That's satanic. If your faith is not built on solid foundation, it will not withstand the devil's assaults. And that's Peter's point today. Jesus taught, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house, and it did not fall because it was founded on the rock. And then he says, and everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, the wind blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Christian maturity is necessary for strong faith. Putting on the full armor of God is what deflects the fiery darts of Satan. War is coming to our doorstep, even in America, and we need to be ready to defend the faith. I got one question will be answered this morning. What should we be afraid of? And Peter in today's text exhorts us to be fearless in the face of persecution. He repeatedly addresses the question of proper and improper fears in the middle section of this epistle. And if you remember last week, he stressed the necessity of an exemplary life in this hostile environment. We saw in last week's text, Peter alleviated the fear of persecution with quoting Psalm 34, when he said, if you remember this, whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. He must turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. And it was possible to lead a good life even in Peter's day. And believers could still evade trouble and live in peace, Peter says, by controlling the tongue, by telling the truth, by doing good to others. He said that in last week's text. But I love his first exhortation here in verse 13, stating you must be passionate to seek goodness. Look at verse 13. I love this. He says, now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? Well, that's a good verse. I like that. Now, we could translate this verse by saying, if a man lives with absolute zeal and devotion for all that is beautiful, just, and good, how many enemies can he possibly have? Right? This rhetorical question reminds me of another one by Paul when he says, if God be for us, who could be against us? Well, Peter's rhetorical question shows that it's unusual for most people, not all, even those that are hostile towards Christianity, to harm believers who prove themselves by being good. And the word zealous was a particular word that had a political overtone in first century Israel. Peter is exhorting his audience not to become political extremists, but to spend more of their energy in doing good. And so if we can say this in today's day, don't go to abortion clinics and burn it down. Don't get politically nuts, extreme. Just do good. Be gentle. Giving them the truth. Peter's saying we must have a passion for goodness if we're to avoid some persecution. Again, we will never avoid all of it. We will never avoid all of it. Think about it. Everywhere Jesus went, he sought peace, did he not? Everywhere Jesus went, he brought peace with him. Everywhere. The most gentle man ever to live. Yes, he was fully God, yes, but he was still fully human. Well, listen to the note of optimism found in Scripture. Listen to Proverbs chapter 16, verse 7. When a man's way pleases the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Romans chapter 13, verse 3. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Well, he says, then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. Now, certainly not everyone is good. Well, what Peter says in this verse, if you're zealous for what is good, usually refers to a life characterized by generosity, by unselfishness, by kindness, by being thoughtful to others. Psalm chapter 37, verse 3 says, trust in the Lord and do good. Do good. Proverbs 3, verse 27, do not withhold good from those whom it is due, when it is in your power to do it. Proverbs 11, 23, the desire of the righteous ends only in good. Titus 1:8, be hospitable, a lover of good. Titus 2:7, show yourselves in all respects to be a model of good works. In your teaching, show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned. In other words, Peter's saying such a lifestyle of restraining evil, sometimes even the most wicked foe of the gospel, will become your friend. This happened to me on the workplace. I used to just kill people with kindness. I mean, they knew I was not only a Christian, they knew I was a pastor. And they would persecute me and say stuff behind my back, and I'm good with that. But I would always be nice to them on a consistent basis. Every time I walk by that person, hey, man, how we doing this morning? Then I hear the cheers when I walk away. I don't care. Ball's in your court, bro. But that's what it means in doing good. It doesn't take much effort. It takes more effort to hurt somebody and hate somebody than it does to love somebody. And if you have that attitude, I'm telling you guys, you will win people over. You don't got to speak. That's what you must be consistent, zealous pursuit of goodness. Remember back in chapter 2, verse 12? Let's go back there real quick. Chapter 2, verse 12. Peter said, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable. Why? So that when they speak evil against you, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the visitation. Yeah, kill them with kindness. But be consistent. Don't just, let's see, I'll just be nice Monday, Wednesday, Friday. No, it's never a day off to do good, guys. Never a day off. But as a practical matter, if a believer seems to have a number of enemies, persecution could be the cause, but it's also possible that the victim is earning those enemies the old-fashioned way by being a hypocrite, by being faithless, and being a hearer and not a doer. We must never confuse the trouble we deserve with the trouble we do not deserve. Again, go to chapter 2, verse 20. Peter already pointed this out. 2 verse 20, I'm sorry. Where he says, for what credit is it when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. Nonetheless, Peter is conceding here. It is possible to suffer for doing good. Think about this, guys. Because at times oppression is commonplace, or corruption and deceit rule in society, the good are usually not welcome. They are not welcome. Isn't that true in our country today? Think about big tech. Big tech companies hate Christians. Most of our government hates Christians. Hollywood can't stand Christians. The wealthy? Not really. Not really. Why? Why does evil hate good? Because good exposes it. Jesus was the most beautiful thing ever to walk on the planet. The most perfect, the most nice, the most generous, the most wonderful, the most beautiful. And they crucified him. Basically, what Peter's doing here in this chapter is preparing the church and us, by extension, for persecution. And it will come our way. Ordinarily, he maintained if we live well, life goes well. But yet, he does concede that irrational persecution is always possible. Look at verse 14. He says, but even if you should suffer for righteousness, he kind of changed his tune a little bit. Even if you should suffer for righteousness, you will be blessed. That's what Peter says. So having a passion for goodness is certainly not a guarantee against suffering. It may only make it more unlikely or less frequent. Don't forget, everywhere Jesus went, because everywhere he went, he exposed the darkness. Everywhere he went. And that's what happens when you go around the believers. Whether it's the workplace, it has family. You should be uncomfortable. didn't do anything. And then God says, I'll elevate you. You're the second man in the world. You may not like the suffering, but on the other side of that, you might not even see it this life. Don't look for it. Don't get beat up in the person. You look behind you and go, later when you're after you have suffered for a while, God of grace has called you to become more like Christ, make yourself secure, firm, strengthened, and established. And Peter is not the only one in the New Testament who expressed the blessing in suffering. The Apostle James, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet various trials of all kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, so we don't lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. The Apostle John in the book of Revelation gives a promise in the days of suffering. God says, listen, do not fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to be thrown into the prison that the state is in. Acts chapter 4, 5 to 51. And when they called to the apostles and beat them, charged them not to speak in the name of Jesus, then they let him go. They left the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer the honor. Here's the second have no fear of them. Hear that, Hallmark? Have no fear of them. Hear that, Pastor? Nor be troubled. This is an allusion to Isaiah chapter 8 that says, do not fear what they fear, nor be in dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you shall honor as holy. Let him be your fear. And let him be your dread. Exactly, church. Peter's saying, you know what? Fear God, not man. We don't fear man. I don't fear man. No fear of man. No fear. Psalm 118 says it best, the Lord is on my side. I will not fear. What can man do to me? The Lord is my helper. I shall look in triumph on those who hate me. You know my greatest fear is? Pastor Adam, angry, German pastor who spoke out openly against Adolf Hitler. Here's a man like Goebbels. He also helped Jews escape from Germany. He lasted 10 years of persecution until finally he was imprisoned and executed. But before that, he brilliantly said, "Those who are afraid of man have no fear of God, and those who fear God have no fear of him." Outstanding. Outstanding. So we shouldn't fear persecution. Instead, we need to prepare for it, to defend our faith. Yeah, absolutely. Look what Peter says in verse 15. He says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you." When Peter tells his readers to be prepared, he means that they should not only be willing, but you better have the ability to speak for Christ. Therefore, they must know the teachings of the Bible. They must know Christian doctrine so that they're always ready to defend the truth. This is so important, yet so sad. Why? Because nobody knows doctrine. Nobody knows the truth. How can you defend what you don't know? There's no teachings going on in a lot of churches these days. Churches, I'm telling you guys these days, not Lighthouse, but they just go through the motions. We're in here Wednesdays and Sundays, verse by verse, book by book, solid doctrine teaching. You can't defend what you don't know. We need to be prepared. Tiger Woods was the greatest golfer because he prepared for it. Tom Brady won 7 Super Bowls because he prepared for it. The apostles took on the world because they were prepared for it. For you to be ready to defend your faith, you need to prepare. Guys, you need to learn. You need to pray. You need to be here on Wednesdays. You need to be here Sundays. You need to be here every time that door's open. You need to be ready. Don't think you can do this on your own. You're no match for